friends, welcome back to Beer and Beauty. It's Kasha here. Right now there's just a couple days left in June. June is Pride Month, and during Pride Month I've been trying to do a lot of colorful looks. I've been trying to post them on Instagram, but I haven't been very good at posting them to Instagram. The beginning of the month I thought I was going to post a new rainbow look Instagram every day, but that's just not what happened. June is a really busy month for face painting and makeup, but I have been doing quite a bit of colorful makeup because it's my favorite. It's one of my favorite things to do is to do colorful makeup, and one of my favorite things in the makeup world is colorful eyeshadow palettes. And today I wanted to show you my top 10 favorite colorful eyeshadow palettes to help you celebrate Pride and just for summertime. I think summertime is a really fun time to wear lots of color. So I wanted to go ahead and, I should wear I have a rainbow flag right across from me. I thought I'd put it behind me, but should I do that? That might be kind of cute. Let's go ahead and talk about my top 10 favorite eyeshadow palettes, favorite colorful eyeshadow palettes. You know, this is I haven't tried every single colorful eyeshadow palette out there, but I've tried quite a few, and a lot of them are really great. And I narrowed down my top 10 favorite eyeshadow palettes that are colorful. Let's go ahead and talk about that today. But first, before we get into it, let's present our beer of the day. It's Beer and Beauty after all, and I picked this beer because of this adorable kitty cat on it. It's like a little lion cub, and the name of this beer is called Did We Just Become Best Friends? I picked it because it was just like, well, this beer is for me. It's got a kitty on it, it seems sentimental and cute, and it's a double IPA brewed with Galaxy and Eldorado hops. So let's crack it open and see what it tastes like. It smells like an IPA. Cheers. It does kind of taste fluffy. It's got like a kind of a soft, it doesn't have a bite, you know, it's not super hoppy, it doesn't have like a hoppy bite. It almost kind of tastes like fluffy, but it's still very delicious and still hoppy enough to satisfy the likings of somebody who is into IPAs. And yeah, it just makes me think of relaxing in the grass with little butterflies flying all around me, you know? It's great. It's delicious. Cheers to that. Oh, and by the way, it's from the brewed and canned for Hoof Hearted Brewing by Great South Bay Brewery, Bayshore, New York, distributed by 12%. So, it's from New York, so it's kind of local. It's very delicious. It's a great beer. Loving it so far. Cheers. So before we get into talking about what I have ranked as being some of the best colorful eyeshadow palettes in my opinion, I'd like to mention a couple honorable mentions. The first honorable mention I'd like to talk about is my Urban Decay Moondust palette. A lot of people, when this palette first came out, they didn't really like it because they didn't really understand what it's supposed to be. These shadows are really pretty. They're like awesome little jewel tones, but these aren't eyeshadows. They're more like eyeshadow toppers or like a little bit of a glitter sparkle addition. You can get pretty good pigmentation off of this if you use like a glitter primer, but I think alone, if you try to do a look with just these eyeshadow, first of all, they're all glitter, so it's just going to be a muddy, glittery mess. So it's kind of like a palette that you have to use with others. But it's a very finely milled glitter. What I usually do is I use my finger to add a little bit of color to a look, and it really does give that look a little bit of extra oomph, a little bit of extra color, and makes it more glam and glistening and glittery. If I want to add more glitter to a look, especially if I have a colorful look, I will reach for this palette just to, with my finger, add a little bit of color to it. I think I'm going to use this one. I'm going to just add a little bit to my eye right there. Oh yeah, and I feel like a little bit more of an alien. A little bit more glittery, a little more glistening after I add that. So I love this palette for that. But because this isn't necessarily an eyeshadow palette, this didn't make the top 10 because it's a glitter palette, or it's like a palette I often use when I do colorful looks. Another honorable mention that I love to use that has been such an excellent addition to my collection is my Face Candy Atlantis palette. This palette is an all blue toned eyeshadow palette, and I think it's really fun. Some people were complaining about the pigmentation on this. I feel like the pigmentation is really good. I especially love the shimmers. The shimmers are really amazing. I do like this. This blue is a pretty unique blue in my collection. It's a nice pastel-y, a muted blue, which is great for blending out colors like blue tone looks without using a nude color. Just use like a muted blue to blend out that blue tone look. I feel like this shade is a really close dupe for a shade inside the Riviera palette from Anastasia, that like brilliant tealish blue kind of color. And I love this like Empire blue shade. This has been really fun. For those of you who don't know, this palette was made as like a dupe for the fake palette that Tarte released as their April Fool's joke. She's like, oh no, it's an entirely blue palette. How funny. Nisi Pisa made a great like funny skit with the Barbaras talking about the creation of this palette, which I'm gonna try to link down in the description so you guys can check that out if you happen to be interested in doing that. But I really love this palette. I feel like whenever I'm doing blue look, it does aid in the production of blue looks, but it didn't make it into the top 10 because it's not really a rainbow palette, it's not really a colorful palette, it's just a blue palette, but it's the best blue palette. I really love this palette. I've been using it a ton. Comes with a great mirror. Yeah, that's the Atlantis palette from Face Candy. Love it. Another item I'd like to mention in my honorable mentions before I talk about my favorite colorful eyeshadow palettes is these colorful highlighter palettes from Anastasia. I've got the Moonchild palette and the Aurora palette right here. And I actually am wearing some of these on my face today. They're not part of the collection of the top 10 because they're not eyeshadows, they're highlighters. But every time I do a colorful look, I always reach for these, either to find the perfect inner corner highlight, which is how I'm wearing it today. I'm wearing a mixture of Raine and Spectra from the Aurora palette on my inner corners, and a little bit on my brow bone too. For those purposes, for your brow bone, for your inner corner, or even just your highlight, these palettes really pull a colorful look together. It gives you that greasy alien goddess look that you might be going for when you're doing colorful looks. And they're just fun. They're just super fun to use. I love these. And even though this isn't in the top 10 because it's not actually an eyeshadow palette, it's a palette I use a ton. Like, if you look closely, it looks like every single one of those shades has been dipped into quite a few times. I've had this Moonchild palette a lot longer than this one. This one I've only had since November. This one's been getting quite a bit of love too. These are great palettes, both of them. I love them both. And the last palette I'd like to mention, another honorable mention to my Natasha Denona Purple Blue palette. This palette is absolutely stunning, and every time I use this palette, I get a stunning look out of it. I did use this purple. This is an amazing purple that I was able to use in the crease of this look to blend out some of my other shadows. Yeah, every single one of these shadows that I've used in this palette has been amazing. It's the mattes, there's not a ton of mattes, but the mattes are smooth. The shimmers are rich and unreal. Like Natasha Denona shimmers are just unreal. I picked this one as my honorable mention out of all my Natasha Denona palettes, of which there are 3 tops. I picked this one because this one's the most colorful, but it's not part of the top 10 most colorful eyeshadow palettes because it's not really a palette that I think of when I think of colorful eyeshadow palettes. Though there is some color here, there's still, I think, more neutral tones in this palette than there are colorful tones. So I don't think of this as a colorful palette, but it does. And when I reach for this palette, I don't think color, I think shimmer. Like the standard quality of this palette is the richness of the shimmers, but I have been able to put together a couple of pretty extraordinary colorful looks with the aid of this palette. I love this palette so much. And that's the honorable mention, so let me moisten my palette so we can get into the top 10, shall we? Yes, I think as you keep drinking this beer, it gets to be more hoppier as you go along. And it's 8%, it's pretty strong, so you gotta be careful. Good thing I'm not going anywhere. I'm just gonna stay here and make YouTube videos. Cheers to that. Now, in this video, I'm going to mention, I think it's about almost half and half. Like half of the palettes I'm gonna talk about may not be available anymore, or it's going to be a little bit harder to get your hands on because a few of them are already discontinued. A few of them are just not as available as they once were. But I just wanted to talk to you in terms of what are my favorite colorful eyeshadow palettes, like the ones I used most to make colorful looks. So The first palette I'm going to show you, this is in the number 10 spot, is my Morphe 35B palette. As you can see, this is in the older packaging, and this is a palette I don't believe you can buy anymore because it got replaced by the James Charles palette, which I don't have, by the way. So this is, I guess you could even pretend that this is taking the place of the Morphe James Charles palette. It's one I never bought because of the drama, but not only that, but I had this palette, so I figured I don't need that palette since I already have this one. It's basically the same thing. It's a rainbow palette by Morphe. These shadows, see, it's a really beautiful palette. It's got such a fun color scheme. There's lots of great colors in here, and it's a palette that I used a ton while I was doing freelance work for Halloween. Like when I'm doing special effects looks, I use these shadows a lot whenever it calls for, you know, colors. Around Halloween time every year for the past 3 or 4 years, I've used this palette a lot. I don't use it as much anymore because I've got many other eyeshadow palettes, and this one's a little bit older, and this one doesn't have as great color payoff as some of the other ones I'm about to talk about, so this is why this one's in number 10. But the color scheme is pretty comprehensive. It's a true rainbow palette. It does have good enough pigmentation, and it's been extremely useful. It's been very versatile for Halloween looks, and it's been fun. And, you know, you can't get the 35B anymore, but you can get the Morphe James Charles palette if you're into it, or you can get one of the other palettes I'm about to talk about. So that's number 10, the Morphe 35B palette. The next palette I'm going to talk to you about is also a discontinued palette, but I think it's a palette that I love to reach for because the quality of the shadows is just there. They're just rich, beautiful, colorful shadows, and I'm so glad that I was able to buy this palette while it was still available because I love reaching for it. I still reach for it all the time. Did I reach for it today? I don't think I reached for it today. It's the Urban Decay Kristen Leanne palette. I bought this when it was like already discontinued and it was on sale at Sephora, and I just paid 20 bucks for it. But I pick up this palette all the time. I think a lot of people like got turned off by it because, I don't know, I love the packaging. I think the packaging is absolutely beautiful, and I love having this like amongst my eyeshadow palette collection. But I get that a lot of people are just like confused as to what to do with these shadows with this like kaleidoscope inspired conglomeration of the shades. I get it. I get the appeal of this being a kaleidoscope inspired palette, but I get why people weren't really attracted to it in that way. But you guys, the pigmentation on these shadows is absolutely unreal, and that's why I love it. And I especially love using these colors in the center here as my inner corner highlights. They're super unique transformer shades. So one of them like has like a pink shift, one of them has a blue shift. I'm gonna attempt to do a little swatch for you. And they're so fun to use as an inner corner highlight or just to brighten up a look. Let me swatch these two blues. These two blues are absolutely unreal. That's how they look on the finger, and that's one pass. It's just an unreal pigmentation, and every time I use this palette, my looks come out awesome. I still have never used this gold or this, you know, these neutral tones, but I'm really excited to still too. And I've heard, I haven't used this black a ton, but it is extremely black. Look at that. Let me just swatch that for you. Yeah, it's a very soft and blendable, very pigmented black. It's really great. I love it. So number 9, colorful eyeshadow palette that I love, Kristen Leanne Urban Decay eyeshadow palette. I never use this palette alone in a look. I always add it to something else, but there's some seriously great, very pigmented, very rich statement colors in this palette that I love to use. I use this palette all the time to put together looks and just give certain looks a little bit of extra oomph. Love that. So the next palette that I'm going to talk about is going to be a new palette. And she's very new to my collection, but she immediately proved herself with her blendability, her softness, her brilliance, and her pigmentation. This is a Anastasia Riviera palette. I just got this. I'm at New York back in April, and you know, the second this palette released, I'm just like, oh man. I've been really good about this no buy year thing, but I was coveting this palette, and I am wearing a lot of this palette on my eyes today. I used a little teal shimmer. This guy over here too is a really beautiful shade, and this Mediterranean shade here, And the purple's really rich and pigmented. Really hard to get a nice pigmented, rich, but also very blendable purple. That's very true to color. Every one of these shades is very true to color. Shimmers are very shimmery. They're very statement and shiny and blendable. It's just a beautiful palette, and I'm glad I have it. You know, I was attracted to this palette especially because I lived in the Riviera for a little while, so the idea of a Riviera-inspired palette really spoke to me, and it was like one of Anastasia's most true rainbow palettes that she's ever come out with. Like, she's had colorful eyeshadow when this palette came out, a lot of people were just like, oh, well, Anastasia's never had a colorful palette before. I'm just like, but wait, do you remember this? I have this. I think a lot of people forgot about this one. This is the Anastasia Artist palette. This is a really old palette. This is something that's been discontinued a long time ago, but as you can see, the color scheme, even though I still reach for this palette quite a bit just because this aubergine color is so unique, as you can see, it's just not as exciting looking on the inside as this palette. One of these palettes is clearly prettier than the other. It's like a lot more fun to look at than the other. So this is my number 8 for favorite colorful eyeshadow palettes in my collection. I have quite a few throughout my collection, but you know, I'm showing you my favorite 10. I've only used this palette a handful of times, but she's been very reliable. She's been very dependable. She's been very pretty. Not to regret buying this palette. She's great. I love this palette. Now, I have a handful of Juvia's Place palettes that are really colorful and really beautiful, so this was really hard to pick which one would be my favorite colorful Juvia's Place palette, but I decided to pick Zulu because just when you open her up, this is the most, I think this is the most exciting looking Juvia's Place palette when you open it up from the inside. Like, there's lots of beautiful Juvia's Place palettes, but this one just kind of is in your face with the beautiful, fun colors. Like, these colors are super unique, and they're really fun, they're really bright, they're really gorgeous. I love this palette. I was really loving this pink during Valentine's Day when I was doing lots of pink looks. This pink is a super unique pink in my collection. As you can see, these pans are huge. Like, you can see this palette against my head, and these are huge pans. The colors are very true to color. They're very pigmented. The mattes are very smooth and true to color and bold. And the shimmers are really beautiful too. I think I need to actually swatch some of these for you so you really get a sense of this. This lime green is a really gorgeous color that makes this palette stand out. Look at that. And they're so like creamy. Like they almost kind of have like a wet feel to them. The shimmers do, at least. And that's the teal one. I think that was just the quality of me swatching. But yeah, you move it back and forth and it's like a really beautiful color payoff. I bet a lot of people are really curious about the quality of this yellow. This isn't the only yellow that I have from Juvia's Place, but it's a really warm kind of yellow. A lot of makes me think of the Lion King or something. Oh yeah, so that's a pretty good yellow. That's not bad at all. And it feels smooth. It feels really almost kind of creamy for a matte, which is strange. And I think one of my favorite colors in this palette is this pink. I think this pink is really unique. I don't have a pink quite like that anywhere else in my collection. And she swatches really nicely too. So I really love this Zulu palette. I think it definitely deserves to be on this list for my top 10 favorite colorful eyeshadow palettes. And I can't wait to use her some more. Isn't she so beautiful? And I think I bought her for like $16 because I waited for one of the Sephora or the Ulta 20% off sales, so I was able to score this palette for like $16. So affordable for these huge pans that are so beautiful and so colorful and like such a pretty palette. It was worth every penny of that $16. I believe Ulta is currently having a 20% off sale until the end of the month, and I believe they're going to have another 20% off sale, I think, in October. If you're thinking about getting this palette or any Juvia's Place palette, keep an eye out for those sales. Really cool. I love this palette. Okay, so we got colorful eyeshadow palette number 7, I believe. So I'm gonna just jump right into it. It's my NYX Ultimate Brights eyeshadow palette. And the reason that I love this palette is because, well, first of all, it is a true rainbow palette. It's a really beautiful, just a colorful colors. True, beautiful, colorful colors. And at first I didn't really like it because I thought that the pigmentation was kind of weak, but now that is kind of the reason that I like it. Because it's not super pigmented, it's a really essential tool when creating colorful looks, because there's quite a few like pastel kind of looking shades that are very helpful for shearing out a look, or you know, using a transition color that's like a colorful pastel kind of color rather than a neutral color is always fun to have around for creating those colorful looks that are very comprehensive, just purely colorful looks, no neutrals, not blended out with neutral colors, but instead blended out with pastels like these. And the fact that they're not super pigmented aids in that use. And I basically use this palette all the time whenever I'm doing colorful looks for that reason, because this purple has really been helpful because of how shearable it is, but it still has pretty good pigmentation on its own. Like, you can totally build these up. I really love this orange because it's pretty neon.
It's pretty impressive.
But she doesn't swatch so good. Yeah, she's really pretty. That's a really pretty like neon color. Some of these colors are really pretty on their own, and this is a great palette to grab if you're just kind of thinking about incorporating colors, because it's a little bit easier to work with because it's a little bit more sheer. You know, sometimes when a color is super pigmented, it's a little harder to blend out and it's a little bit less forgiving in that way, but I think this palette's pretty forgiving. And I think the price is pretty forgiving. I believe this palette is around $20, so it's an easy palette to incorporate. And you know, $20 isn't that cheap, but there's also a ton of colors in here. Like, this is 16 colors in this tiny palette, and it's very compact. It's really easy to add to a makeup artist's kit too, because it is so small, and it's so easy to throw into the bag. And I feel like it's pretty sturdy too. Like, I could throw this around and it wouldn't break. The shadows are pressed a little bit harder too, so they're not gonna be so soft that if you just drop it ever so gently once, that it would fall apart. They're a little bit more sturdy than that. So love this Kelly Green too. This is a great palette overall. Would recommend the NYX Ultimate Brights eyeshadow palette for sure. Okay, so I think we're starting to get into some of the more really fun, really quality eyeshadows that I'd like to show you. In the top, basically every palette I've showed you today has been pretty quality, pretty fun, pretty colorful. But now we're getting into really impressive territory, like really kind of standout stuff. The next palette I've got to show you is the Huda Beauty Electric Obsessions palette. I don't know if you can still get this palette. Huda kind of rotates through her palettes a lot, but when I bought this palette, it came out during the first round of Obsessions palettes that she created. This is the one I picked up, and it is so pigmented. It is so standout and so pretty. Like, this is a really fun and easy palette to work with, and it's so tiny. It's so great to pack inside of an artist's kit. And I really love, you know, something I've been on the hunt for is like a really good matte red in a lot of eyeshadow palettes, and the one that's in here is really good. I'll go ahead and swatch it for you. This is a really pigmented matte red. That's awesome. See? Check that out. The shimmers in here are really good too. Like, I think Tati wore this one, and it feels wet looking blue one, bluish purpley one, and yeah, that swatches really amazingly too. It's so brilliant, so rich. I think a lot of bright eyeshadow palettes really go in for the hot pink. Not all of them do a really good job, so I'll go ahead and swatch that pink for you. It is a pretty good pink. But I think one of the more special colors in here is this neon orange. This neon orange is really good. It's really special, and it's pretty unique in my collection. Now, there's a lot of companies that try to go in for the neon orange, and I think this Huda one is pretty good. Like, it comes out looking pretty nice. So I really love this Huda Beauty Electric Obsessions palettes. I know that she just came out with a bunch of like neon summer palettes. I'm on a no-buy year, so I can't buy any of those. So I'm just kind of enjoying this one as much as I can, as well as all my other beautiful rainbow eyeshadow palettes that I'm showing you. So I really don't need any more, but I do acknowledge that those Huda neon palettes look like a lot of fun. And I badly wanted one of those Gemstone Obsessions palettes that came out during holiday, but I talked myself out of it. I ended up buying the Huda Nude palette, which is a really essential tool in my kit. But I decided since I bought that palette, I can't like overdo it with the palettes, so I didn't buy any of the Gemstones Sessions palette, but I wanted them in my heart. And maybe after the no-buy year, I'll get one of the neon palettes, but I imagine they're probably going to get discontinued too. But this palette, I think is one of the ones that started it all, and it's really worth it. The pigmentation is there, they're very true to color. This, oh, I forgot to even mention this like foresty green kind of color. This is a really good color too. It's a great palette, loved it very much. Okay, so I think I might have messed up the count a little bit. I think I might have mentioned the palettes in a strange order, but anyway, this is palette number 4, and it's a new palette in my collection. This is the Pinky Rose Bright Lights palette, and look at her. Doesn't she look like so much fun? This palette looks so beautiful. And yeah, this is also a palette that I picked up during IMATS, and I so glad to report that it's been a favorite. I've been loving playing with this palette. The colors not only look amazing, they just look bright and so much fun. They are. I don't think their shadows are as easy to blend as an Anastasia shadow. You know, you have to work with it a little bit too, and you also have to very much understand color to work with this palette, but I do believe the shadows are nicely pigmented. They're very true to color. They're the colors that you're expecting to, and there's a couple pretty unique shades in here too. As much as I don't really care for pressed glitters, I never touch those. I don't know, if I'm gonna use glitter, I'm gonna use a Stila glitter, one of those suspended glitters. I don't use pressed glitters, but the colors themselves, I think I've used all of the mattes in here at least a couple times, and they're all beautiful. I think my favorite color in this shadow is this candy apple red right here. It's a very unique color to my collection. And I mentioned earlier that I'm always on the hunt looking for a really good matte red. This one looks very different from the Huda one, as I'm about to show you. So that's the one from the Pinky Rose palette, and this is the one from the Huda palette. The Huda palette is definitely much deeper, but it's been such a fun color to incorporate into a lot of summertime looks. It's just like a warm, almost kind of neon red, candy apple red kind of color. I love it. This fuchsia kind of purple is super amazing and fun, and it feels so soft. It's so like, it almost does kind of feel like an Anastasia's shadow, but a little bit harder. So that's the fuchsia one right there. This color Glitz, this is the one shimmer in this palette, like a true shimmer. She's been really fun to use too. She's like a really beautiful shimmery teal with a lot of reflect. That didn't come out so good. I also have a lot of dry skin near my elbow here, so I'm sure the swatches down here aren't gonna be as great. But yeah. She's really reflective and pretty. I love that color. And so a color I want to incorporate more is acid green. I'm thinking about doing an acid green dip dye on my hair for the summertime. I feel like that'd be fun. And then it would encourage me to use more acid green eyeshadow looks. So I feel like that could be fun. But let me go ahead and show you the acid green. It's not called acid green, but yeah, it's very satisfyingly pigmented. As I said, these shadows are very true to color. Oh yeah, that color is called Smash. That's a pretty good shade name, I would say. It's nice and sleek, it's easy to pack, very small, cardboard, and I think it's a beautiful palette. I love this palette. I've been using this so much ever since I got it. It's been my kind of favorite palette to use since I got it. I've been loving the Pinky Rose Bright Lights palette. I also got the Exotic Peacock palette at the same time as I got this one, but this is just a little bit more fun, a little bit brighter, a little bit more versatile than the other one. I love this palette so much. Definitely number 4 in my Bright Colors collection. Now that's a beautiful arm. Maybe I'll swatch on the other side when I do more colors. I'm running out of arm space over here. The next palette that I'm about to talk to you about is kind of an OG player in the colorful eyeshadow palette game. And these aren't necessarily eyeshadows, these are pressed pigments, but you can't talk about colorful eyeshadows without talking about the Urban Decay Electric eyeshadow palette. And yeah, I don't think I could ever declutter this palette because it is so true to color. It is an OG of the eyeshadow palette game, and I feel like to this day, even though I collect colorful eyeshadow palettes, I feel like these colors are so unique. The colors that are in here still perform amazingly, and it's still a worthwhile palette. And I'm sorry that you can't get this anymore, but I'm sure you could probably get on Poshmark or what have you. People declutter these all the time out of their collection, but I will never declutter mine. I love this palette. Because these are pressed pigments, you're not necessarily supposed to use them on the eye, especially any of the warm tone shades. Like, I think Savage and Slow Burn and Jilted and Urban are the ones that you're not really supposed to use on your eyes, especially if you're sensitive and you're prone to staining. But I find that if I use a thick layer of primer, I'm usually fine. And I don't use this palette a ton, admittedly. And my favorite shades to use out of this palette are, well, I do really love Slow Burn. Slow Burn is pretty amazing. There she is right there. As you can see, that was way more pigmented than the orange that I showed you earlier from the Huda one. So even though this palette's pretty old now, I think I've had this for about 3 years, it's still, I only pick it up to use one shadow here and there because it's such a statement kind of palette, but it's still a super unique palette. Like, it's still a standout situation. This silver is pretty unreal. Let me swatch it right there. So I remember it being a lot more shimmery and pigmented, but it's still a pretty damn good silver after all these years. Very reflective, really fun. A really unique shadow in here is this like acid green color called Thrash. I still will pick it up to use this as a color. Very smooth still pretty pigmented. And even the blues are in here are super amazing. Like, this Gonzo color is very unique, this palette. People have been coming out with all types of crazy blues. But this blue is so, I don't know, it just makes me think of like the ocean. I don't know, it's just so blue and so electric and so awesome. So I just think that this is a palette that you can't neglect to talk about when you're talking about colorful eyeshadow palettes or pigment palettes. I guess what this is a pigment palette. And I will never declutter this because it's amazing. And I love the packaging. I feel like it still speaks to, like, it's such an iconic packaging. It's just like, oh yeah, that's the Urban Decay Electric palette. And yeah, I still use it once in a while. Great mirror in here too. So, this is number 2 spot. We're getting down to the nitty gritty. And this is a palette that I discovered earlier this year, got it at the beginning of this year, and when I started using it, I was just blown away. Freaked me out how amazing this palette was. And this is technically another pigments palette, but it's one of the best. This is the Colored Raine Vivid Pigments palette, and it's just incredible. It looks beautiful when you open it up. These are just the most insanely pigmented like pigments I've ever touched. They're absolutely amazing. Every single one of these shadows that I was able to use has been amazing. I was using the greens a lot during St. Patrick's Day. This red is mind-blowing, and all the blues and purples are beautiful too. It's really hard to get some really amazing pigments. I don't know, this palette kind of makes it look easy, and it's the most pigmented palette I think I've ever had. Let's go ahead and do some swatches. Like, I did a get ready with me where I was using this palette for the first time, and it just shocked me. When I put it on my eyes, I was just like, whoa! I did not know it was gonna be so pigmented. It's crazy. But I do want to show you this red, especially. This red is absolutely unreal. And it feels pretty dry, but, you know, holy cannoli. It's a threatening amount of red, and it's actually pretty funny that I did end up putting it next to the Huda shadow. So you can see this red is way more pigmented than the other one. I bet a lot of people are going to be really curious about this yellow. This is not the best yellow I've ever touched, but it's a good one. It's nice and pigmented. It does have kind of like a daffodil, dandelion kind of yellow hue. And I personally, one of my favorite shadows in this palette is this forest green. This is super pigmented. Look how dark that is. It's amazing. I love that. I got a little Jamaican thing going on right there. And I'm sure you guys are pretty curious about some of these purples. I have been really into like fuchsia purples lately, so I'll go ahead and swatch this guy right here. That's what she looks like on the finger. And yeah, as you can see, these are just so much more pigmented than some of these other shadows on here. It's a threatening amount of pigment, and that's why I love it. This is such a good palette, and it will definitely be an essential tool for doing colorful looks for a long time. I love this palette. Okay guys, we made it to the end, and now I'm about to show you the #1 eyeshadow palette that I think is the best palette for colorful looks. Like for colorful shadows, I think this brand is kind of legendary, and everybody kind of knows that this is the brand that you go to if you want colorful shadows. And let me know down in the comments below if you guessed it before I showed it to you. But it's my Sugarpill Pro palette. The thing about the Sugarpill palettes is that you can design your own. And when I went to go buy my palette to design with, they didn't have their red, so I ended up buying it later on my own. These are the most quality, most true to color, most just best eyeshadows for color that you can probably find on the market. The pans are nice and big. This isn't a cheap palette. I believe this cost me like $120 for this palette because you buy them as singles that you fill the palette with. If you're somebody that does a lot of color, especially if you're, say, Decay. Does anybody know who Decay is? She's like an amazing Instagrammer that does these fantasy looks where she does like a bunch of color all over her face all the time. She uses these a lot, and it makes sense for her because there's a lot of product in each one of these shadows, and these shadows are just famous. Like some people, I think this is the best yellow on the market. I'll go ahead and swatch that for you. I don't know, I feel like that one's just like the most true yellow that I've been able to find anywhere. It's just like not too warm, not too cool, not too lemony, not too dandelion-y. It's just like a lemon yellow. And it's the best one I've been able to find. One of my favorite shadows from this palette is this. I think this is Kimchi. I think this one's the one named after Kimchi the drag queen. And it is a beautiful, highly unique color that comes in handy all the time. I use this one like crazy. My shadows are starting to dry out a little bit because I think I've had this palette for over 2 years, but it's still an incredible palette. And I still use it all the time. This pink is a super reliable pink that is, I think this is a pretty famous color too. Oh yeah, look at that pigmentation. Really true, really awesome. And I have to show you this red because I remember when James Charles released this palette, he talked about how like there's no such thing as a really good matte red on the market. Like his red is the truest, best matte red. I'm just like, are you just kind of ignoring Love Plus by Sugarpill? Because Love Plus by Sugarpill is the matte red of the market. Let me go ahead and swatch it for you. Maybe I'll put it next to this other red. So that's Love Plus by Sugarpill. Sorry, I messed up. I kind of ended up showing that off screen, but there's Love Plus by Sugarpill. As you can see, it's a very true red. The one from Colored Raine is a little bit darker, and the one from Huda is a little bit darker pinker. So the truest red I've ever been able to find, matte red, has been Love Plus by Sugarpill. And I don't think you can take that away from Sugarpill. I think they really did do an amazing job with this color. And I believe all their colors are cruelty-free, and I think most of them are vegan, which is just like, how do you get this kind of pigmentation without using carmine? I don't know. I could be wrong though. But I think they're working on becoming a lot more vegan. Honestly, if I were to just have this Sugarpill palette, I probably would. I don't really fully need all these other colors. Of course, you know, I just like having them because look at how beautiful I've made my arm. And I realize I'm getting eyeshadow all over my white shirt, but I don't care. So that is it, guys. Those were my favorite colorful eyeshadow palettes. I hope you guys found this video like entertaining and fun to watch and interesting, and I hope you like how beautiful my arm has turned into throughout the course of this video with my swatches. But yeah, let me know down in the comments below if I missed any really amazing colorful eyeshadow palettes out there. My favorites are also your favorites. Do you agree with me? Would you rank things a little bit differently if it were for you? But based on like how much I use them, their pigmentation, their reliability, their usefulness, their utilitarian purposes and their blendability. This is how I ranked my favorite eyeshadow palette. If you're in the market for some colorful eyeshadow palettes, I hope this helps you because there's a lot out there right now. Like I think the hot new thing for summer 2019 is colorful eyeshadow palettes. So I feel like even though there's tons of new ones coming out all the time, I feel like the ones I showed you just now are some of the best. They're really, really good. And yeah, I hope you liked watching this, and I hope you really liked hanging out with me. I really liked hanging out with you. This was a really fun video for me to make because I love colorful eyeshadow palettes, and I feel like colorful looks in the summertime is where it's at. I love it. It's one of my favorite things. So until next time, thanks so much for hanging out with me. I really liked hanging out with you. I hope you really liked hanging out with me. And until next time, cheers. Bye.